You know, one of my favorite things ever is toys to life. I'm a toy collector. I love toys. And to be able to have toys that came to life in video games to me was kind of the culmination of possibility and the culmination of what I really thought was kind of that dream goal of Toy Story, was to see the things I loved came to life in video game. And one of my favorite franchises was Skylanders. I loved the Skylanders series. It was something that we had originally played with my son, and it was something that I just fell in love with, and I still love to this day. I think it's a marvelous series, and something I really wish would come back. So today I want to kind of do a bit of a deep dive on all 6 Skylanders games. Now these are only going to be the home console ones. I don't have any of the handheld ones, so I can't speak to those, but we're going to look at the 6 Skylanders games, and we're going to rank them. Normally these would be like maybe a minute or two talking about each game, but I want to kind of dive deep on all of these and talk about the pros and cons of each one, and give you what I feel is a fair ranking for each one.
So first and foremost, why Skylanders? And it's a twofold answer, really. I mentioned it in the intro. It hit me at a time when my child had just started playing video games, and this was the first one they actively showed an interest in. Even before Pokemon became the obsession, Skylanders was our thing. This was something where we started with Swap Force. It looked cool, and I took a flyer on it. It was something I took a chance on to see if maybe Victor would be interested. And it really carried forth from there. We eventually bought backwards towards Spyro's Adventure and Giants, and then purchased every subsequent release. We would do regular runs to the Toys R Us here in Portage to find new figure releases, and we honestly just loved the franchise. For me personally, it combined my love of toy collecting and video games, and it was the first time it really felt like video games to toys was a gap that was bridged. Was it a kid's game? Yeah, it absolutely was, but they were fun, the figure designs were cool, the characters were neat, and the games were pretty solid. Now, what was Skylanders? Well, Skylanders was a Toys to Life video game franchise from Activision that was developed both by Toys for Bob and Vicarious Visions, and each one had varying levels of success on the games that they worked on. Each game released a series of figures that could be used in-game to play as a different character, with each character having unique attacks, animations, appearances, voices, and abilities. Each character belonged to an element, so earth, air, fire, water, life, undead, magic, or tech, and eventually introduced dark and light. And parts of the game were locked behind certain elemental gates that could only be unlocked by a character utilizing that particular element. So you had to have that character on your portal at the time when you found that particular elemental gate. And then each game also included a co-op mode and a battle mode, and if I'm remembering correctly, starting with Giants, there was a version of a minigame called Sky Stones, which was kind of an in-game trading card game that was added, and I actually really enjoyed it. There was one, I think, in every version of Skylanders except Spyro's Adventure. I also want to say that with this ranking video, this is going to be a ranking against the franchise itself, or at least the mainline console releases, the ones I mentioned in the intro. None of the handhelds, none of the mobile games, and not the Superchargers spinoff on the Wii that was just a racing title, just the 6 mainline ones. So
We're going to start things off right now with the original on the Xbox 360, Skylanders, Spyro's Adventure.
As is always the best option, we begin at the beginning with Skylanders, Spyro's Adventure. And how great is this? So this was the return of Spyro. This is a good thing. Like, Spyro was a classic character from the PlayStation and the PlayStation 2, and was a character that was awesome. He was a great mascot to bring back to video games. And this initially actually started as a reboot that Toys to Bob was allowed to do on Spyro, and it was not a kid's game to begin with. It was an actually grim and gritty title with a otherworldly Spyro, and I think I speak for all gamers when I say, oh, thank Christ that did not happen. The first mainline success of what was the concept of Toys to Life as well. There were previous ideas of what Toys to Life could be for video games that came out prior to Skylanders, but Spyro's Adventure was the first one where it could be actually observed as a concept that worked and was marketable and actionable and exciting. It introduced the Portal of Power, which is your base of operations for adding figures to the game that you controlled. So whatever figures you bought, you could put them on the portal, they would appear in-game. You could only have one on the portal at a time unless you were playing multiplayer. That was a different story. But if you were playing single player, one character at a time, pop them off, pop a new one on, you're instantly swapped in and you're able to use that character after a brief animated intro with a voice out or voiceover of the character to introduce them a little bit. It also introduced Chaos, who was the archetype villain that was typically blundering into success. Classic slapstick, kind of Looney Tunes character. Very enjoyable character. Awesome voice acting behind him as well. You were able to customize the toys and use them at a friend's house with any power-ups or upgrades that you found. So everything was stored on an RFID chip inside of the action figure, which I thought was really cool. You could level up your characters via experience, unlocking different abilities and combat mechanics, and improving attack modes and things like that. Bobcat Goldthwait and Patrick Warburton were in the voice cast, which is unbelievable. Music was done by Hans Zimmer. Like, there was so much going for this game. And then the bad parts came in. There was no jumping, so you were only moving around. And unfortunately, when you're moving around, it was very plodding. It was very slow. It was really felt like you were moving through molasses. It wasn't really an exciting game at all. It was kind of a walking simulator, if I'm being honest. There wasn't really a whole lot of challenge to the game. It was a very easy title, and it wasn't super enjoyable. For like everything that it had going for it, the enjoyment factor just was not there for Spyro's Adventure. It felt like a tech demo. It felt like a proof of concept that Toys of Bob had put together. Activision said, yes, let's put it out. And you see it in the game. Like, there's lots of cut corners, lots of it would be cool if that didn't feel like it was fully fleshed out. Animations are skipped, things like that. And it just does not grab you like other games in the series. Yeah, it was cool to see Spyro back, and it was cool to see the expansion of his world into the Skylands, but overall, it just wasn't there. For me, this game gets a D. Now, keep in mind, this is ranking it against the Skylanders franchise itself. So, of the 6 games in the core franchise, I think Spyro's Adventure gets a D. That is going to be the lowest ranked game in the franchise, so no failures for Skylanders.
Up next, and introducing big guys to the list, this is Skylanders Giants, also on the Xbox 360.
Back to my roots!
The second game in the series was Skylanders Giants, and Giants, like its name implies, is our first game with a hook for what will be the major gameplay feature. In this case, surprisingly, gigantic characters. One character from each element, there were figure variants of certain characters as well, that operate as giant characters, meaning they're more powerful than standard Skylanders and take up more space on screen. They also move significantly more slowly than the regular Skylanders. It also introduced some new kind of locking mechanics that were based strictly on the figures that you were playing. So there were certain things in the game that could only be accessed by giant characters, so if you didn't have one, you were kind of SOL. You were stuck being unable to unlock certain chests or break through parts of levels, and that kind of sucked. But it was something where the thing that Activision and Toys for Bob did very well with the Skylanders franchise is they always made sure that if there was a hook for a game, the starter pack that you bought had at least one way to access everything you did. Now, if you lost the figure or the figure broke or something like that, you were up a creek without a paddle, and you would have to go buy a new one. But, I mean, overall, it's not a bad thing that they shipped the starter packs with the characters or the figures needed to make your way through the title. It also introduced the light core mechanic for figures, which would light up certain transparent parts of a character's figure to have light shine through. Every single giant character had this, and there were other characters as well. And was it a gimmick? Absolutely. It was absolutely a gimmick, but it was also a cool as hell gimmick, and it translated in game with them having additional abilities when compared to their standard counterparts. So I thought that was kind of neat. There are some particular light core characters that just looked absolutely fantastic, especially if you play at night where they're just like glowing on the portal. I thought that was super cool. It also did something that I thought was awesome, and something that the series stuck with throughout its entirety, with the exception of the final game in the franchise, where it introduced backwards and forwards compatibility. There were a lot of V2 character figures released, so Giants figures had an orange base, Spyro's Adventure characters had a green base, and each of the characters that were originally appearing in Spyro's Adventure and had a redesigned figure for Giants worked in Spyro's Adventure, and they would work in every subsequent game that released. I thought that was really cool. It made collecting a lot easier, and it made playing the games easier as well. There were 8 new characters introduced with brand new figures and designs. The characters can now level up to level 15 instead of level 10 in Spyro's Adventure, but there was still no jumping, and the game still felt incredibly slow. Like, it was a very plodding experience, especially when you had to play something like one of the giant characters, which were just so slow on screen and took up so much real estate that it wasn't super fun and super exciting to play. I do like that they added actual difficulty levels that you could adjust and play at different, difficulty levels, go figure. That made the game a little bit more difficult and a little bit more enjoyable, but overall it just wasn't something that really hooked me, and it's because I'm spoiled by the next game in the franchise. So Skylanders Giants, it is an improvement over Spyro's Adventure. I'm going to give it a C. It's a middle-of-the-road game, but I do think there were some major improvements here from the first title in the franchise.
The first Skylanders game I ever played, and one that does have a bit of a special place in my heart, but I want to look at this fairly, so I will be objective in my review. This is Skylanders Swap Force.
Press the jump button.
Skylanders Swap Force was the first Toys to Life video game I ever played, and what a game to get introduced to the concept of Toys to Life. The character figures felt more dynamic. The toys were like everywhere. You couldn't go into a store, a video game store, a big box store, or a toy store and not see the figures everywhere. And the game itself was so much fun. This is the first one developed by Vicarious Visions. They wanted to build upon what Toys for Bob was doing with Spyro's Adventure. It actually started around the same time as Spyro's Adventure's development. And the biggest thing, the biggest improvement, the thing that opened the game up significantly, you could finally jump. What a novelty. It was something that just made it feel like a legitimate platformer. You weren't reliant upon bounce pads or anything like that. You could actually jump to different levels, and it really made the world feel more alive and made the levels feel more exciting and interesting. This was originally a concept called Skylanders Shapeshifters, which evolved into the swapping mechanic for the Swap Force figures we ended up with. The Swap Force characters were unique in the fact that you could split them in half and they were held together by magnets. Each one had a unique movement attribute or ability. There was rocket, climb, dig, bounce, sneak, speed, spin, and teleport. This is something we would see heavily moving forward. We already had the elements introduced in Spyro's Adventure, but additional elements or additional gameplay opportunities like these different movement attributes were something we would see regularly going forward. You could split them in half, as I mentioned at the waist, and combine them and mash them into a shared element type, so you could have like a water-fire character on screen at the same time, while retaining the leg's movement ability. This led to some really interesting body horror appearances, with like a half skunk, half octopus that was kind of horrifying to look at, but the movement abilities opened up new swap zone areas of the levels that offered new gameplay options and things to discover. And each character's ability offered something a little bit different. So like the sneak ones, you would have to kind of like stealthily make your way through a level to avoid spotlights. The octopus, the tentacles there, you were able to climb up a wall and like stick to the wall and move around and dash around. It was really fun. And one of the things that they did heavily on this one was they introduced a ton of figures. There were over 50 total toys. All of them have a blue base, so there's over 50 toys to collect for this one. 16 brand new Swap Force characters, so 2 for each element. 16 brand new standard Skylanders of the core Skylanders series, so 16 totally new characters. And then 16 returning Skylanders from previous games that are backwards compatible with Giants and or Spyro's Adventure. And then 8 additional light core style versions of characters as well. So characters that would light up and look incredible on the portal. This is the first game in the franchise to have HD graphics. And for me, this is the one that was the most fun of all the Skylanders games. And ultimately, when you're playing a video game, that's what you want. For me, Skylanders Swap Force is an S. I think this is the most perfect of the Skylanders titles. Yes, there's some nostalgia glasses in play here with this being the first one that I enjoyed, the first one I played, and I have some incredibly positive memories playing this with my family. But for me, this is perfect. This one gets an S.
Up next, one that I felt was very clever and added some really interesting gameplay mechanics to the series. This is Skylanders Trap Team.
Moving on now to Skylanders Trap Team, and this was the first game that I really recall them doing some unique stuff with not only the in-game mechanics, but external mechanics as well, outside of things like the light core figures. Toys for Bob was back on development for this one, and they ran with things that Vicarious Visions had established with Swap Force. The new mechanic in this game is the trap mechanic, where you're able to capture certain named villains and hot swap to them for a limited time and levels to use their abilities. There's over 45 different villains you're able to capture. There's also villain-specific redemption arc quests that Mags will give you to allow you to play with them for a little bit longer. So you actually have like these missions that you have to go on to earn your redemption, villain. And it's goofy, but it's fun. They're enjoyable. They're silly, but they're nice. The portal for the game is really clever. It actually has a speaker built into it, so whatever villain you have captured and have in the trap crystal that's inserted into the portal will actually talk to you as you're playing and both talk a little bit of shit as well as kind of just talk about things in general. Just kind of like get a little bit of backstory and lore for the character, which I think is kind of interesting.
Gulper have to be nice now. Kind of strange, but Gulper get used to it.
But that's also where the game loses me a little bit. The traps were a separate purchase from the standard toys, which was kind of my first moment with Skylanders, where it felt like they were no longer trying to sell you a video game. They were trying really hard to sell you a toy line that happened to work with a video game. And that was something where I was like, okay, that's a little crappy, but I forgave it because it was clever and it was enjoyable. This also introduced light and dark elements, which I thought was really clever. There were 57 total toys to collect. There were 18 Trapmaster Skylanders. These were larger characters that had clear plastic weapons to use in-game, and these allowed the Trapmaster characters to destroy the in-game Traptanium element, which gave you different things that you're able to purchase unlockables for and things like that. There were 18 brand new core Skylanders, 5 returning characters that were backwards compatible with previous games based on when they first appeared, and then 16 mini Skylanders. Now, we had sidekick Skylanders, which were basically the minis introduced in Giants, which I forgot to mention earlier, but they were just kind of magic items. They didn't really do anything. The minis actually in this one are fully playable characters, which I think is pretty cool. The thing that gets me, so you have these 57 brand new figure toys to collect, and these were, I think, around $15 a piece to collect when they dropped. There were also 60 trap crystals that you had to collect, and they were not easy to track down. They were very, very, very difficult to find, at least in my area. So it went from something that was an enjoyable experience with collecting on something like Swap Force, where figures were abundant and you could find them pretty much everywhere. I even found chases out in the wild, which I thought was really clever, to the stuff on Trap Team actually being difficult to collect for, making it harder to enjoy the full game. The heavy focus on the extra toys is really, for me, what knocks it down a bit from an S rank. To me, it felt like a money grab, and granted, like, I understand, having worked in the industry, every video game is a money grab, no matter what. But the scarcity of certain figures and certain elements like the trap crystals where you weren't able to purchase them, so you were not able to actively capture every single enemy in the game, made it less fun to collect for and made it a less enjoyable experience. Overall, the game is really, really fun. I think it is one of the stronger games, and if the figures were a little more readily available, this would also have been an S rank, but for this one, it's going to get an A. Just slightly under an S. I'll even call it an A+. How's that?
All right, bouncing over to the Wii U now. And this is one that, I will be honest, I haven't spent a ton of time with before doing this video. And this added something really interesting to it. First off, it added Donkey Kong and Bowser as playable Skylanders, which, that was crazy. And it also added driving elements to the franchise, which I thought was very, very cool. This is Skylanders Superchargers.
As you can see, I have turned on the fasten cell doors.
Up next, we have Superchargers, and we are on to the Wii U, and Vicarious Visions is back in the... God, I apologize for the pun you're about to hear, but they're back in the driver's seat. And the reason I say apologize for the pun is because, as you can probably tell by the footage here, this adds racing elements to the franchise. This introduced vehicles into the equation, which, much like the Swap Force gimmick from Swap Force, 100% a gimmick, but for the most part, it's actually pretty enjoyable as long as you don't really consider physics a necessity. Sometimes they forget that physics matter. You could drive on land, sea, or air with each different vehicle type, which was really nice, and as you played and drove, you would find vehicle upgrades and customization options that allowed you to change everything on your vehicle, from the exhaust to the tires to the engine to the horn, and each vehicle had an associated driver. So having both the driver and the vehicle associated to that driver on your portal would grant you the Supercharged status, giving higher damage output and performance for both the vehicle and the character. And I thought that was kind of neat. One of the things I did really like about it, though, was it wasn't required to have those vehicles together. So If you were using an undead character, you could just as easily use a light vehicle and be able to work that way and not really have to worry about it. It allowed you the opportunity to just focus on a particular character you liked and be able to swap your vehicles out, or vice versa. If there was just a vehicle that you really enjoyed for a particular level, you could just stick with that one. The racing mode outside of standard gameplay that gave you some variety to the overall gameplay options that were in the game was also really nice. And there were a number of toys to collect, but it was a considerable step back from what we saw with both Trap Team and Swap Force. There was 20 Supercharger characters and 20 vehicles for each character. So the 20 Supercharger characters were basically your core Skylanders. So those were the characters that were your essential characters that you're able to play in game. Now, all the ones that were from previous games are able to be brought forward, and there were vehicles associated for each one. Now, interestingly, if you played this on a non-Nintendo console, you only had 18 characters and 18 vehicles because Nintendo consoles got the ability to use Donkey Kong and Bowser and their associated vehicles. And there were actually some plans in place to use Peach, Kirby, and Fox as well, but things fell through. When the sales started to tank on Superchargers, the writing was on the wall, and Nintendo didn't grant the permission to use those characters, and that's probably for the best in the grand scheme of things. This was your first game to add online multiplayer to the Skylanders universe, which I think is kind of a stroke of genius. The way that the games had evolved and the way that kids were evolving and growing as they played video games, these kids were now 5 or 6 years older than when Spyro's Adventure released, and they were now playing more games online. So this allowed them to continue to play the Skylanders franchise just online with their buddies, and I thought that was pretty cool. It's a fun game. It's really good. There is a bit of an uneven execution on the racing mechanic that does bring it down from an S rank for me, but I still think it falls into an A. I still think it's an overall fantastic game and one of my favorites in the franchise.
And unfortunately, the final Skylanders game that we've had released so far, this is Skylanders Imaginators.
Finally, we come to Skylanders Imaginators, and I think this is probably the most ambitious of the Skylanders games that released on home consoles, and unfortunately, kind of like Icarus, it flew too close to the sun. Every previous toy is supported, but there are 0 figures released for this game that are backwards compatible with previous titles, which it kind of sucks because I really liked that kind of option of getting a new sculpt for a classic character and being able to use it in previous games. Every character is brand new in this one, though, so you don't really get that, which, I mean, bully to them for creating a bunch of new characters. I think that's really cool. The big gimmick for this game is the ability to create your own Skylander, which is where the Imaginator name comes from. There's 29 total creation crystal toys, and those all felt very similar to the Trap Team mechanic, and they were just as readily available as the Trap Team crystals were, which means they weren't. They weren't readily available at all. There were supposed to be 34 of them, 5 of them never released. There were only 29 total that ever made it to public, and it was just something that was hard to track down and hard to collect for. Now, they allowed you a really, really robust series of things that you were able to adjust. You were able to alter a ton of features for each character with every piece of your appearance, your paint scheme, your voice, outfit, abilities, height, weight, weapons. The creation suite was like ridiculously robust, but a ton of it was locked behind a paywall where you couldn't unlock it unless you had a particular figure or a creation crystal, and that kind of sucks. The new figures were all considered sensei characters. There were 18 master senseis and 11 villain senseis. Now, some of these ended up going unreleased here in the States or really, really, really limited release, making collecting the entire line incredibly difficult to do. That said, there are RFID things you can buy on Etsy that will allow you to use the characters in-game. So if you don't want to fork over $300 or $400 for a Skylanders figure, you can probably figure out alternative ways to do that. There were also 2 guest stars. So kind of like in Superchargers where you had Bowser and Donkey Kong, in this one you actually have Crash Bandicoot and Dr. Neo Cortex, which I think is really cool. They're fun to use. The Sensei and Villain figures were able to unlock different powers based on their different battle classes that they represented. Brawler, Sorcerer, Smasher, Bowslinger, Knight, Quickshot, Sentinel, Ninja, Bazooka, and Swashbuckler. All of those were things that you were able to apply as a class to your Imaginator character, and each character, each Sensei unlocked, I should say, a particular special ability that you could teach to your Imaginator. There was also a Chaos character, because it's Chaos, and who wouldn't want to play as the big bad in this game? The Create Your Own Skylander gimmick was laid out because Toys for Bob knew this was going to be the final game in the franchise, and they wanted fans to be able to make their own Skylander. It was the most requested feature from fans, so they wanted to lay that out and allow kids to be able to do that. Lots of characters from Skylanders appear as NPCs in the game, which makes it feel like it was an advertisement for the Skylanders Academy animated series that was on Netflix, which we watched a lot of in our house, but this just felt like an ad for that, which kind of stuck. There was only 10 levels in the game. I think 15 if you bought some of the additional things that you could add into the title, but only 10 on the disc. And ultimately, the thing that really drags it down for me was the unsatisfactory Create a Skylander feature, which, like I said, it's robust, but it just wasn't laid out well. And I forgot where it was hidden, for one thing, when I was capturing footage and didn't realize it was behind the minus button. And it's just not something where I really had a lot of fun with it because the creations just don't look great. Overall, it's an uneven experience, and ultimately it's unsatisfactory, and it's a sad swan song for the franchise that I loved so much. I'm going to give this one a C. It comes in middle of the road. It's good, but it's just average for me.
Yeah, so there you have it. All of the Skylanders games played through, deep dive, and ranked. I am so happy to revisit this franchise. It's truly one of my favorites, and a lot of that is nostalgia for seeing my kid kind of come into their own and play video games and the things that they loved. And it was something that I really enjoyed, being able to play with them. It was something that I know my wife enjoyed it as well. And we still kind of talk wistfully about Skylanders, and it is truly something I wish would make a comeback. Let me know in the comments down below, are you a Skylanders fan? Are you a Toys to Life fan? What are your favorites? I know for a lot of folks it's Amiibo, but as much as I love Amiibo and I do collect them, I think they are, frankly, the worst of the Toys to Life stuff out there. I think the best might be Skylanders. Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, folks, I've been Jay. Appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me. If you enjoyed today's video, give it a thumbs up. If you really enjoyed it, consider subscribing. I'd love to have you stick around. And until next time, remember to play more games and stay square. I'll talk to you soon.